Welcome to Miss V, the Storyteller podcast. You guys, I always say this, but I am so grateful to God because God sends the people who are supposed to be here. My guest today, her and I, we had our meet and greet, and I always do this, but I'm telling you, we talked for the longest time. And that's how you know God is connecting people. When you have just a simple meet and greet and you can sit and talk to someone as if you already know them, then you know that that's God centered. So I am so excited and so thrilled to have Chastity Dawn. I messed up, y'all. I've been practicing on these names and I done messed up. Got to be more careful. Anyway, welcome, Chastity. So please tell us a little bit about yourself. You know I was practicing that.
I know you were doing so well until we hit record.
It is what it is.
It is what it is. It's okay. We know who we are. So,
So go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself. Well, I'll recover from this.
yes. All right. I am Chastity. I am originally from the Midwest. I was born and raised in St. Louis, lived in Chicago for about 15 years, and about 5.5, actually almost 6 years ago at this point, I visited Atlanta, Georgia for the first time, and I thought it was really pretty and green, and I said I should move to Georgia. And so fast forward almost 6 years later, I didn't understand why at the time, but looking back, I know that God had a plan and this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. So here we are. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, just outside of Atlanta. I love it here. And it's just been an amazing journey. And I'm so happy to connect with you. So thank you for having me. And it's so funny how on our call, yes, we jumped right into it like we already knew each other. So this is so good.
Yeah, she is telling the truth. And as we were talking and getting to know each other, I learned a lot about her. And I knew that she would be a great person to come and share a part of her story. You know how I feel about stories. I believe that stories bring us together. It helps us to connect. And when we share our stories and the things that we've gone through, it helps someone that's out there that's listening that may be going through the same thing that we went through, and it encourages them to let them know you can make it. We went through that and we made it through, and so can you. So Chastity is going to share a story with us. So Chastity, go ahead and share your story.
All right. So I was thinking of like where to begin because it's like so much has happened and it's been so great, so many ups and downs. And I think for a lot of people in this season, a good starting point is the beginning of the pandemic. And I believe that for a lot of us, it's when God turned our lives right side up. It felt upside down at the time, but I've discovered that it was being turned right side up and it was painful. So let's go back to March of 2020. And I was at a job, I was in HR, and I loved what I did for a living. I had been with the same company for just about 9 years, and I had such a great experience. I learned so much. I thought that this was the place I was going to retire from, and you could not have told me any different. And I had a conversation about unconscious bias, and yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And I used to be very dreamy and think, you just talk about things and problems get solved and we care about each other. Well, I was asked when my last day was going to be. So,
Oh my God.
yes. So yeah. But the beauty of it is that my last day in the office was March 6th of 2020. And if you think back, it was a week later when things just completely got out of control with COVID. And I was not only in HR, but in the restaurant business. And that business got hit hard. And so I was able to see right away because, we went into quarantine and businesses had to lay off employees. They had to cut back on salaries for the employees that they could keep. It was a terrible, terrible time. And we didn't know how things were going to turn out. Like, if you think back to how you felt at the time, we were at the mercy of just watching the news and seeing what
Yeah.
information is going to give to us. And we're just seeing numbers of people dying. And so it was just so crazy. But I was at home and I was safe and sound and away from people and living my best introvert life, you know. Now tears were there, so I can't lie about that because I was hurt, you know? This is the place I thought I would retire from, and then that rug was just pulled from under me, and when you hear the words, "But we've been so good to you," it's like, well, yeah, you have, but, so I had a lot I had a lot to process. But the beauty of it is God showed me like, look, you are at home safe and sound. You don't have to go out and be in this world. You don't have to deal with the HR stuff, and it was a nightmare. And so I started doing what I call my morning stuff. And this is where I wake up in the morning and I go into my other bedroom because I have a lazy boy in there and I just sit there and I watch the sunrise. I spend time with God, just talking with Him. And it was just such a beautiful season. And it has become a way of life. And it's now how I start my day every day now. So I love the way that God used that time to bring me closer to Him. But in the meantime, I'm watching money go out and nothing come in, right?
Hmm.
So I'm like, okay, God, you see my bank account, right? And I was thinking, in the human, and I tend to talk in terms of in the human realm, this is what we would do. In the spiritual realm, this is what we should do, right?
Hmm.
So I'm feeling the Holy Spirit say, just wait, just rest. The human part is like, girl, you see that bank account, you better look for a job.
Yeah.
But I didn't. I just, the more I talked with God, the more I learned about just being patient and being obedient and to stop trying to control outcomes. And so I didn't look for a job. And I received a call from a guy that I went to high school with. And we were previously connected. We were not friends in high school, never said a word to each other in high school. He was a year ahead of me. I think he was like homecoming king or prom king or something like that. I think it was homecoming. Anyway, he's on this level in my mind, and I'm like nobody. I didn't have that voice. I was not out there. I was not, I've always been an introvert. So anyway, we were connected because of social media, because we went to a small private school. So most of us are still connected. He reaches out and he was like, you have an HR background, right? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, how would you feel about doing some consulting work? Okay. He said, I'll teach you everything you need to know. So it sounds like a great deal to me. So I worked a job and it required me to travel. It was fine. It was, God equipped me with what I needed to do this job. So in 3 months, I made a significant amount of money, and it let me know like this was God taking care of me, because it would
Yeah.
have happened any other way. And just think, if I had looked for a job and found another job, I would have been tied up in that job and I would have been fearful to leave,
Yes.
you know?
Yes.
So we get so attached to a regular paycheck and we want to hold on to that security and stability. And God is like, I want to do something more in your life. And so I'm so thankful for my obedience in that. But it was not without a mess to come, I will say. So this man I was working for, very charming, handsome, successful guy. I learned a lot from him and it was a great experience. And so I would do these jobs and it required he and I to talk, regularly because I'm working for him essentially. So he starts opening up and sharing more of his personal stuff with me, which, makes me share more of my personal stuff with him.
Hmm.
And so he starts telling me about his marriage, which is his second marriage, and how, he just starts sharing all these problems with me. So I'm compassionate and I'm just wanting to fix everything. And so I'm encouraging him, telling him, like, you need to work on your marriage. You have a good woman. Like, you don't want to be out here dating, believe me, And so I just saw him as this good guy, and keep in mind, and I'm not going to pretend like I don't know better, but I used to believe that inherently all people were good,
Mhm.
and that if I'm good to people, like everything works out for me. And, I'm pretty happy most of the time. And even though I've been through things, I just have this general happy disposition and believe that people are good. Well, I used to believe that people are inherently good. So fast forward, just us connecting, and he shared some information about an affair that he had. And
Oh.
yeah. So then, in this time, I would wake up and the Holy Spirit would like just give me these downloads, and I would send him messages because sometimes it was stuff about him, and I would send messages, and he's like, how do you know this stuff? So then he starts to lean on me a little bit more, and I'm telling him like, look, I'm no closer to God than you are, but just get your situation right, whatever. So then there was one job that we were working. We ended up in the same state together, and it was around my birthday. And this was in 2021. And he asked me about getting together to celebrate my birthday. And generally, I would avoid getting together by myself with a married man, but this is also someone I'm working for. So
Mhm.
I'm going to say there was a gray area, but there really wasn't a gray area. I created that, So I could have declined, but I did not. So that evening that we went out to dinner for my birthday turned out to be an affair, where I just got romantically involved with him and made some horrible choices. But it's so funny, like looking back, because I can say that, like I said, I can say I was so naive and I didn't know. And I had to look back on how gullible I was. Like, I had been married before, I had never been out there dating. I heard about bad experiences. I've had a couple like liars and,
Mhm.
people with with less
Mhm.
integrity than they should have, but never anything on this level, with someone who was just so charming, said all the right things, just was so poetic and everything, And I believed everything that this man told me, because by then he decided that he was going to leave his marriage. And I know there are people thinking like, you were just wrong off the bat, and may not even want to like hear the rest of the story or understand my perspective in this. But I think we've all, if we're real about it, all of us have been through something where we made some poor choices, and this was
Mhm.
mine. This was mine. But, he said he was getting a divorce, and I believed it. And then I would wake up sometimes and he would send me like these text messages that were like very detailed and specific about the life he wanted to provide for me. And
Oh, wow.
the way that he would say that he felt responsible for taking care of me. And when I tell you, it was good stuff,
It sounds like it is. It sounds like what we
Girl,
want to hear.
it was exactly what we want to hear. Now, looking back, I can see, and I've heard men say this as well. When we were sharing information and I thought it was innocent, I was placing an order, you
Mhm.
know. I was sharing with him everything that I was looking for, and he was able to speak back and
Mhm.
speak as as someone who was going to fulfill that order. And silly me, I'm believing it. I'm stuck on stupid. I'm smitten. I'm in love, And then also the fact that I truly believe that God, even though this situation was wrong, I truly believed that God was in it. And I do still, I know that God was in it. And I will say that because, and I'll explain, it'll all come together, but God uses our poor choices. If you think of anyone who has a story, they got some dirt in their past.
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
anyone who's standing up and giving their testimony, it did not come because they lived this clean and pristine life. And so we went through periods where it's like, okay, we're going to stop talking because we want to do this right according to God's will. We've made these mistakes, but we want to do things right. and then we would start talking again, and finally it got to a point where I I was reeling emotionally and things were just falling apart because after so many months passed, it was clear to me that this man was not going to do anything that he said he would. So I was living this life where it was about protecting him and his image.
Oh,
So
wow.
I'm working jobs with other people and hiding what's going on. And so they say all these good things about him. And I'm thinking, you just don't know, but at the same time, I'm in love. So I'm going to agree with you, So it was just such a tough time emotionally. And ultimately, what happened is, looking back, I can see the manipulation. Like I said, I placed an order and he fake fulfilled that order. And then there was one point, and not to even make light of things like suicide, but he shared with me a situation where he had been suicidal. So anyone who has any level of empathy, what that does to you.
Yes.
It gives you the limit to where you can hold that person accountable because you don't want to be the one to push them over the edge, And so that placed boundaries on how much I would hold him accountable for his behavior. And so anyway, the situation ended when he was faced with there was so much drama involved. I had a so-called friend who started just kind of stalking him on social media, sending messages to his wife, alluding to the fact that he was cheating. Things got so messy. And then, of course, because he was threatened with exposure, then, oh, he tossed me in the garbage,
Mm,
like,
wow.
yes, yes. It was like, I'm out, And so that was hard because I'm thinking, like, wait a minute, you've laid out vacation details. I mean, the location, what we're going to do. You got a playlist on Spotify. Like,
My God.
yes, so much detail being put into it. And so I had to deal with the fact that, first and foremost, I made a poor choice, right?
Mhm.
So I am just out of control emotionally. And I would say that, we all go through things in life, but if I could say that this was one of the lowest points in my life, it definitely was. And there's a lot, like, I'm giving you kind of like the high level version of this story because there are so many intricacies and so many details to it that, I mean, you can see just based on what I've told you. You deal with somebody who's charming, and
Mhm.
then it's like he comes off like this kind of nerdy kind of guy where he's sweet, like how could he be this
Mhm.
person? And then just the fact that I could see God throughout that situation, and I could be angry at him at this point, but I had to forgive. And
Yeah.
ultimately, once I dealt with that situation, no one wants to feel like they've been discarded,
Right.
because God didn't create any of us to be garbage. And when someone makes you feel like that, like it does not feel good. So I just went to God and I'm like, okay, what is this? Because I mean, you showed me all of these things and this life that I thought you would have, I mean, that I would have. And, I felt like there were all these promises that God made for my life that were going to be fulfilled. And so I was just I could only depend on God, because I was hurting. And but I see that in his spiritual journey, he went from being a believer to I don't know what I believe, to Jesus is nothing, to Jesus is everything, to I watched The Woman King and had a dream and reached out to some African spirituality people and did a divination ceremony.
Oh,
So
Lord.
talking about some deep, deep stuff.
Yeah.
And divination, like you open the door for some evil spirits.
Yeah.
So we're talking about someone who was really lost deep in the darkness, right? That doesn't excuse his behavior,
Right.
but it allowed me to just forgive and then focus on my journey, because I'm like, okay, God, what am I supposed to do with this? And God is like, well, my plan for your life continues. You just do what I tell you to do. And what I understood was I needed to deal with my attachment issues. And
Okay.
so, and that's what the bottom line was. And God is like, you were looking to this man. When I told you I'm going to fulfill these promises for your life, you just looked at this man that was in front of you and expected him to fulfill it, when you should have, stayed focused on me.
Yes.
Like I said, I
Yes.
will fulfill these promises. But, our human nature takes
Mm-hmm.
over, and we think of how it's going to take place in the human realm. And God is like, well, I mean, I got a plan, but, since you got it, do your thing, since you got it all figured out. And so I really had to deal with those attachment issues. And one thing we know is that, so like Jesus told us to repent, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to repent means to turn around, to change your thinking. It's literally like to make a U-turn. So if you imagine driving and you make a U-turn, you're going to go back past everything that you just drove past going in the wrong direction, right?
Yeah.
So going back past it means I needed to revisit these things. So I had to go through that situation. And that's just a version of taking the same test over and over again,
Mm-hmm.
where we're driving in circles. Well, this time it taught me to actually make the U-turn, go through whatever I needed to feel and learn and just purge all of that. And it started with just forgiving him. And I still felt things, but girl, talk about taking every thought captive, and giving it to God. And it's like, okay, God, I know I just talked to you a few minutes ago, but these thoughts are coming up again. And it's like, I've forgiven him. And so that's why I'm able to laugh about it and have peace about it now, because it's like, I see what God did in that situation and the journey that it sent me on, and what I had to learn about myself. Because this story here, most women have some version of this story, right? A man who lied to them, a man who they feel manipulated or deceived by, but it's all in what we learn from it and what we take from it. And what I learned from it is, that I only need to focus on God's will for my life. And
Yes.
in the midst of that, I discovered so much more about myself. So not only was it attachments and relationships with men, but let's talk about friendships, our girlfriends. And so I had two best friends, and basically one of them was there for me, one of them completely
Mm-hmm.
abandoned me, right? So I had one best friend who had been through a similar situation. Now, I supported her through that journey. And we're not talking about a new best friend. We're talking about a best friend since freshman year of high school. So we have been through some things. We've seen each other through some things. And so when she was in her situation that was messy, I supported it. And when I went through it, we literally did not talk for most of last year. And
Wow.
so, yeah. And so I could see the friendship going downhill because she expressed how she felt about the situation, but I expected her to be there for me. But I noticed our conversations were changing. Like, I couldn't tell her what was really going on with me, but she can just tell me everything that's going on with her. So it was one-sided. So by the time things came to just this final end with him at the beginning of last year, I sent her a text message and I said, basically the situation has ended. And she responded saying, good, as long as you do what's best for you. Now, you and I know that if that's your best friend, a call is coming, right? Girl, are you okay? Like,
Yeah.
yes, no,
Oh my God.
no. Uh,
Wow.
this was in the spring of last year. I didn't hear from her until like November of last year.
Oh my God.
But look at this. So my response to that was I still made an excuse for her. So just like I was making excuses for him and his behavior, I had the nerve to tell her, and I'm saying I had the nerve, meaning I'm saying this to myself, like, I didn't understand my value and my worth, even in my friendships. I told her that it was good that she wasn't in my life because of how bad of an emotional place I was in, because I was just doing so terribly emotionally, and she got spared from all that. And it's like, but wait a
What?
minute. My other friend, she came here, she hopped on a
Yeah.
flight, she spent a week with me,
Yeah.
she never abandoned me. But on the flip side, we got this one over here. And then even when we reconnected, things were still a little bit off. It was
Mm.
like, first there's that, reunited and you catch up on everything and, what's been going on for the last year, and it was good. But then I still felt not right about it, because it's like, wait a minute. You've had to heal from feeling like this man tossed you in the garbage. You had your best friend who was in the picture before this man toss you in the garbage, essentially, And I started thinking, like, I didn't value myself at all to allow that, It was not okay. It was not acceptable. And so it got to a point where I had a conversation with her, because I'm thinking, in the past, when we've gone through things, we would have a conversation. Just say she would call me and tell me something that I did or said that upset her. I would listen, and I would just let her have it. I would honor those feelings. And now, when I was younger, I wasn't always like that. I was defensive, I was emotionally immature. But in our adult years, or 30s and on, it was more like, okay, her feelings are her feelings. You need to respect that. And I would simply say, I'm sorry. There was no need for me to try to explain myself or anything. So I'm expecting the same thing in return, right? No.
Mm.
So I pour out my heart and tell her how it made me feel. And I remind her, like, I supported you when you were going through this messy situation. She told me, you shouldn't have.
Oh, Lord.
And I'm like,
Ooh.
huh, okay. But it
Ooh.
just goes to show that once we're so far removed from things, we tend to romanticize it, and we forget how low we were, or how much of a dark place we were in. And we forget how much certain friendships brought us through, or helped us through,
Yeah.
rather. But yeah, so I was told that I should have, not supported it when she was going through it. And so God just took me on this journey of understanding that I deserve better. And
Yes. We
so,
all do. Yes.
yes, so we talk about loving ourselves and whatnot. And I thought that I loved myself, but this right here let me know that I had no respect for myself. I let this man treat me a certain way.
Mm.
I let this friend treat me a certain way, and it had to stop. And so God used all of that, but he really had to break me down in order to help me to get on the right path, to live the life
Mm.
he wants me to live. Because I would say, I want everything God has for me. And so I would be asking God, because, if you grew up in church or know anything about praying, we're always told, like, you pray God's word back to him, you remind him of his promises and this and that. And so I'm talking to God, and I'm like, well, why would you? I'm asking him all kind of questions. And some of us grew up being told not to question God.
Yes, that is an old school way. Don't ask God any
Mhm.
questions.
And I'm like, okay, if he's my father, I'm going to ask him.
Yeah.
And so I started asking God all kinds of questions. And the one question that changed my life was, I asked him, why would you give us the Lord's Prayer and tell us to say, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, if it seems like I can't have it? Now, if you can't lie, why are you gonna have me asking for something that I
Yeah.
can't have? And that just took me on a journey, I say, from the wilderness to the narrow path, you know.
Yeah.
And that was when God began to show me, like, you need to understand that you can have on earth as it is in heaven, but you out here trying to do things your way. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, so I had to go on the journey of allowing God to just fully break me down and then just learning things the way He wanted me to learn it. So
Mhm.
that required me to not only talk to Him, but just listen more, to
Yes.
spend more time reading His word, um, just to spend more time understanding what obedience is. And then the very foundation was understanding that the Bible, that's a book about a king and his kingdom. And we are ambassadors. And it's like, I didn't understand who I was as an ambassador, meaning I operate according to the laws of the kingdom, meaning it requires my obedience to do what God is guiding me to do. So I went from this story of just being heartbroken and depending on a man to just fully trusting in God and being led, by the Holy Spirit. So I do ask God, like, okay, so where is the real husband, like where is the
Yeah,
one who's coming? So I'm not going to say that my life is just so perfect, but I will tell you it is so much easier and just so much less stressful. And it's just such a beautiful thing because I've given up the notion that I can control any outcome.
that's right.
And that's the
I
bottom
think
line.
as women, we do the same thing. And God really has to allow us to go through things in order for us to circle back and realize, you know what? If I say God's will, then God's will, get out of the way. Because I know for myself, I've gone through some things and I've made some bad decisions. We've all made bad decisions. And
Yes.
then when we look back on those, we're like, but you know what? Through it all, God was with me and God still loved me. Because I remember, and I'll give you just a little snippet because I went through something kind of similar. There was this older man. We went to the same church and we were on the volleyball team at our church. And um, in the beginning, we were all friends. All of us hung out together. We did stuff together.
Mhm.
We would hang out outside of the volleyball rehearsals and the games and all that. We would hang out and do things together. But then over a period of time, um, him and I just kind of like connected more, and then I found out, I think he's like 10 or 11 years older than I was. So I was like, but you do know how old I am, that kind of thing,
Right.
but it didn't matter. And so there was one particular incident where it was my birthday and they decided to throw me a birthday party. And so it was at his house. Um, I don't know if it was organized this way or whatever, but I got there first and nobody was there but me. And so, we were talking to everything, and I kept looking around. I'm like, what is going, what's going on? I knew, well, no, I didn't know it was a party for me, but we were having a get together. That's what it was.
Mhm.
And I'm like, well, why isn't anybody here? I'm thinking about they already live in this city. I'm coming from another city, so they're closer than I am. What's going on? So, we begin to talk and everything. Long story short, the dynamics of our relationship kind of changed that night. Not only was I the first person there, but I was the last person because he kept going to get everybody's coat, for us to leave, but he would never bring my stuff. And I'm standing there like we saying bye at the door, like we some kind of couple. Y'all be safe. Give us a call when you get home safe. Where's my coat? I'm thinking, where's my coat? Where's my bag? Why haven't you brought my stuff down? And he closes the door and goes to the kitchen. I'm following it, and again, there's an age difference, and I was very young at the time, and I'm like, okay, well, I guess he wanted to just talk. So, we continued to talk to the point where I was like, okay, well, it's time for me to go because, I have to go all the way back over to, the city where I live. And he
Mhm.
was like, oh, yeah, let me get it for you. So he goes, he gets my coat, he helps me with my coat on, he hugs me, and now he is kissing my neck. And I'm like, what is going on? That turned the whole thing around. And I'm like, oh, oh,
Yes.
that's what my brain go. Again, I'm young. I get in the car, I drive home, and my mind is just doing flip flops and just somersaults because I'm like, what's going on? I get home, I call. And so now we're talking all the time, we're hanging out. I'm thinking one way, he's thinking, what he's thinking. Fast forward, I buy a house and we're still whatever we were. I buy a house and I call him one day to let him know that there was a bird in my house. A bird got in my house, yes. I called my mom. She was no help because by the time I finished calling her, asking her what to do, she's crying, laughing so hard on the phone. I'm mad and offended because she tells me to put a pot on my head, get a spoon, beat the pot. And no, put a pot on my head, put a blanket over it, and and do whatever and open the window, and she is crying laughing while this situation is going on. And so I am mad at her. I'm furious because I'm like, you grew up in the country, birds got in your house all the time, you're supposed to be able to help your daughter. Long story short, she didn't help me. I called him. He was cutting his grass. He came over to my house. Again, we lived about 40 minutes away, so
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't like it was around the corner. He came over, he got the bird out of the house. We found out how the bird got in the house. We closed up the duct. It was through the dryer duct. So we
Oh,
closed that up. And I'm thinking, oh my God, he is so wonderful. I mean, this guy just drove over and got a bird out of my house. I was feeling it. Women,
right.
y'all know how we can romanticize stuff and make it all this.
Mm-hmm.
So then there was another time he came over and cut my grass for me. And I thought it was great, but this particular time I came downstairs. I had a meeting to go to, so I was dressed. He was outside cutting the grass. He came to the door and he saw that I was dressed because when he came earlier, I wasn't. I had gone
Mm-hmm.
upstairs, took a shower and everything. And he's standing, he's looking at me through the door and sees that I'm dressed. But I never say anything. He didn't ask me any questions. I didn't say anything. I thanked him for cutting the grass. And that was the last I heard or saw from him.
Really?
Yes, that was it. But we went to the same church. We were still friends with the same group of people. And I was asking them, well, what's going on? They were asking me. And I was like, I don't know what's happening. I don't know what happened. And one day we had a function at church, and I see him and I see this woman, and they're going in church together. And I was like, oh, so
Oh,
he's moved on and didn't say anything to me
wow.
at all. I did not know this at all. I was so hurt. I
Ab-
could not believe it. And I, like you, I had to do some soul searching, and I went back and, I reviewed the tape. I went back and looked back over the story, and I was like, okay, so there were some mixed messages. There were some things that should have been said that wasn't said. And then what I'm assuming put closure to this, we had 6 a.m. prayer one Monday morning.
mm-hmm.
And we both, because our church did that a lot of times, they would have 6 a.m. prayer. You come in, get prayed up before you went to work and all that. And I went, and I was in the back because I knew I had to leave probably before it ended in order to get home, change, and go to work. So I'm in the back, and he's 3 rows behind me in the back as well. And we praying and everything. And when the prayer was over, they said, go hug somebody. I'm hugging everybody. And he fought his way over to me and
Wow.
he hugged me. And I'm like, what the ham sandwich is going on here? And he wouldn't let me go. And I
Hmm.
guess the hug was, I'm sorry, but the words never came out of his mouth.
I never got an apology either, but it's funny. I'm like, well, at least you got that, even though it wasn't a verbal apology. I,
I'm taking it
well,
as
yeah.
it was a apology because he was hugging me and wouldn't let me go. And I'm like, When I think about it now, I'm like, it would have been easier for you to just say sorry because he was squeezing the mess out. I'm sorry, I should have done better or whatever. But in this particular situation, I'm so grateful to God because He allowed me to go through that. He allowed me to understand that there were flags. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't see the flags because He told me the type of person that He was. And
Mm-hmm.
He verbally said it out of His mouth. When I'm finished with something, I'm finished. He
Wow.
told me that,
Oh
and
yeah.
he showed me that. He told me and showed me, and I just wasn't paying attention. But I am so grateful. And through it all, like you had a friend, I am grateful to my friend because she has been with me through some relationships and
Mm-hmm.
she's had some, but we did not allow that to diminish our friendship.
Right.
We may have had a rough patch where I didn't agree or she didn't agree. We could tell it in each other's voices. Sometimes we would just not say anything because we knew, but we did not allow it because the one thing about both of us, friendships are very important to us. And so we would not allow any outside influences to tear apart our friends because we're vested. And I think people don't really understand the power of a friendship because if you have a really good friend that goes with you through the ups and downs, and you might not like her this week, she might not like you next week, you got on her nerve last week and vice versa. But then if you want to get married and be in a relationship, that is what you've been practicing with your best friend, because ultimately that spouse or that, they should be that friend. And so I'm grateful that I have. Now, I've had some people that I thought were my ride or dies.
Yeah.
They're gone. They were there temporarily and they're gone because they didn't want to put in the work. And like you said, it was one sided. I'm the one showing up. I'm the one vested. I'm the one doing all this. And you sitting on the side just allowing me, and me and my stupid self, I'm doing it to the point where I'm getting tired. And then you move on like it was nothing and I'm hurt. But
Yeah.
it's so true. But I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
When you um think about the man, the friendship, and all that, when you turn around and you look back, as I say, rewind the tape and you review the tape, what are the two major things that you learned from it? I know you learned a lot because you're a spiritual girl like me. I go through and I like, Lord, I don't want to go through this again. So
Mm-hmm.
let me go back and look and see what I learned because I do not want to go through this foolishness again. Okay, I learned that it ain't all his fault. It was my fault. I didn't pay attention to flat. I go down my list of things. So what were the two major things you learned through this relationship with both the man and your friend?
Sure. So one thing that you brought up, I want to touch on this really quick because you got that hug, which you were able to interpret and receive as an apology, for example, and I'm so glad you had that because if you were to ask me about closure, I didn't get proper closure. There has not been an apology. Now, on his side, he may say, because he offered me a potential job with one of his clients here that would have taken me out of the consulting work for him, and it would have made him feel better about himself
Mm-hmm.
for, pulling out of my life and taking the income that came with that. And so I think the closure for him was supposed to be, well, I offered you a job, and I'm thinking, well, that was pretty sadistic if you think about it. You want me to, but that's something else. So I never got that, what I would determine or define as closure. So I have to deal with that. But here's what I learned from it. The closure that I needed to receive did not need to and does not need to come from
From
him.
him,
So what I
absolutely.
learned is that it goes back to the attachment. That's what God had to do in my journey, is to almost like leave me hanging, but to make me hang on to him.
Mm-hmm.
So what I learned is that it is always going to come back to total dependence on God, regardless
Mm-hmm.
of how things look in front of me. With the friendship, it essentially is the same thing with attachment, because I was attached to that friendship. And what I had to understand is that while I may not be the best friend, I'm not talking like I'm this perfect person, like I was such a good friend to her and she wasn't a good friend to me and I'm the victim here. I learned that each of us has our own interpretation of what happened, right? So if you were to have her on or him on, they would each have their version of the story. But what matters is, the bottom line for me is how God has used it to help me to make sure that I learned the lesson this time, because God made it clear, like, you're saying you want everything I have for you. I got work for you to do. And we ain't got time to be
Mm-hmm.
playing around with stuff like this.
Mm-hmm.
So, you're going to have to accept. But what I've learned is when the tears come, when the thoughts come, when the hurt comes, I go to God.
Mm-hmm.
And even leading up to this call, a few things have happened this week. And it's just like the enemy tries, but the devil doesn't have any power that we don't give him. He
Mm-hmm.
will attack, but he can only attack our minds. So I've given you like three things. There's been a lot, but what it came down to, the most important thing, total dependence on God and obedience to his Holy Spirit that
I
lives with.
love that. I
Yeah.
love that. But you know what you just said made me think of something. And I don't know if it's all men, but I think this is how men apologize without words. Because my father is notorious for not saying that he's sorry. And this is how I know this is an apology. He puts money in my hand. Hey, sugar. Hey, baby, if we have a disagreement, if something happens to us, where he knows he said something wrong, he hurt my feelings or something like that. The next time I see my dad, hey, sugar, hey, baby girl, and boom, he will put money in my hand every single time. If we have a blow up today,
Yeah.
if I call him to check up on him or something like that, and we have a disagreement and he knows, I'm like, you know what, I can't even talk to you anymore, Dad, because I can't do this today. The very next time we see him, I see him, hey baby girl, hey sugar, boom, money in my hand. And I don't mean like a 20. My dad already, but I think that's how they kind of do. And then my brother will have a disagreement, but he'll do something for me. And
Mhm.
that's his way of apologizing without words, without actually verbalizing it. And I know that it's attached to it because it comes right after whatever the disagreement is or whatever happened between us. It comes literally right after. And that's their way. Now, again, I don't know if all men, so, men, if you're out there, I'm just saying this is what I think. That is their way of apologizing without using words. I just think it's easy to pick up the phone. I'm sorry, but I don't mind that. So, if my dad wants to apologize like that, I am fine with it. My brother, if you want to apologize the way you do, I am fine with that. You don't have to say the words at all. But I love, when as women we go through stuff and then when we turn back and we look at it, that we actually learn stuff from it. And this is one of the reasons why I like to do my show, is because it lets the listener know, listen, we all been there, done that. I'm sure there's women out there that's listening that's been with a married man,
Mhm.
made some mistakes, but as long as you learn from it, we good. That's had someone to just ghost you and you're not know. I mean, we've all been through some things. So I know that I'm a journaler. I do journaling. I write down, I go back and read. So are you one of those people, or do you write? What do you do once you go through and you learn all this stuff? Are you one of those people that has to put it down? How do you get it out?
So that's funny. I wrote a book, but it started out as a journey of blogging. And it was not about
Okay.
him, it was just about my spiritual journey, my walk with God. And there were some posts that would be kind of like not a direct, well, yeah, it was kind of direct about my situation, but my thing is, as long as I handled it with integrity, because I had to accept the fact that we all have a right to tell our stories. Now, am I going to come out and just put his name out there? And, there's people who know who he is, but this is not about bashing him. It is about telling my story with integrity. So, writing is very therapeutic for me. And I love the journey that God took me on with this, because it started out with like, okay, you're just writing and it's for yourself. Then it's like God is saying, well, you need to start a blog. Okay, oh, I'll start this blog. And then when I started asking God those questions, especially about why would you tell me to pray this, it's like, I'm going to give you the answer, but now you're going to write a book. Now that was
Mm,
hard. And I tried to take a shortcut, because what I did is I wrote a blog post,
hmm.
and then the Holy Spirit is like,
That's
no,
not what I said.
because I didn't want to put my business out there.
Right.
Now, this is not about just telling all the details about it, but it is a part of my journey. It is a part of my story, and we all have a right to share those stories. And I think your platform is so good for that, because you talk to people who have been through a lot, and then
Yes.
people who just go through your everyday run of the mill stuff. But people like that, and I'm one of those people, I don't have a harrowing tale of how I, overcome some big whatever. It's just a regular everyday life story, but we tend to kind of discount it and say, well, there's people going through worse. And so we tend to not share our stories, but writing was very, very therapeutic, and ultimately it became a book and a companion journal. So
Yeah.
for other people
So
who write.
go ahead and tell us what's the name of the book and tell us a little bit about the book and where they can find it. Because I'm sure there are some people out there that want to know this whole story because, as she told you, she left out some pieces, she left out some tea. So if you want to read the whole book, so go ahead and tell us the name of the book, a little bit about the book, and then where they can buy the book.
Sure. So the book is called From the Wilderness to the Narrow Path, A Journey of Surrender and Course Correction. And I would say it's a story of how God got my attention, simplified my life, and showed me what it really looks like to seek the kingdom and his righteousness. And so it is, I'm not going to say I'm spilling any tea. I'm telling the story, but it's really but honestly, there's not so much detail about that situation as it is a journey through my childhood and my formative years that led up to that, and help explain how I made these poor choices and how I'm taking responsibility for these choices, and then how to heal from those choices. So in the book, I start out by sharing my story, and then I share the steps that God shared with me, which I think are foundational. We each have different journeys and different assignments in God's kingdom, but it was really about the foundation needing to be solid, because we have to understand that. And so, yeah, my book, and I also created a companion journal, and it
Okay.
has writing prompts to ask questions to just get people thinking about their journey, because we are in a time where the gray area is disappearing, and
Mm.
we need to know what side we're on. So my hope is that it's really helpful for people in their journey, so we can just kind of stop the insanity and just, focus on Jesus and do what he told us to do.
So
So
where can we
on
get the book?
yeah, so my book is available on Amazon. It's available through Barnes and Noble, Google Play Books, Apple Books, and also the audiobook is available on Audible.
Oh, great. Oh, good. Because I know there are a lot of people who do commuting, and so to
Mhm,
have an audible book, because my one of my friends, she loves audible, she loves that because she travels a lot, so that is great. Well,
mhm.
that is great. I have really enjoyed having you on the show. I pray that anyone that's listening, that you learn something from us. Basically at the end of the day, when you go through something, and this is just from me, this is something that I really learned myself, is when you go through something, rewind that tape, go back and look at it, and take notes. If you journal, write, whatever. What did I learn from this? Because I'm one of those people, listen, Lord, I only want to go through this one time. I'm not trying to keep going in this circle over and over again. Please, whatever I'm supposed to learn, let me learn it so that I can move on. So, Chastity, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for just giving us just little jewels to live by.
Thank you so much, Miss V, for having me. It has been such a pleasure. And I'm so thankful for the experience and just understanding that, my story is important. Yours is
Mhm.
important. Everyone has a story to share. And I want to add, my blog is chastitydawn.com. Look at that. See, I'm mispronouncing my own name. Chastitydawn.com. That's where you can find my blog. But thank
All
you so much.
All right, and you guys, I'll make sure that I have everything in the description so you can just scroll down and you can find where to find her social media. You'll find everything to be able to buy the book and to even reach out and to read the blog. So, all right, friends, thanks.